Imagine standing on cold stone, the scent of sweat and blood thick in the air. The roar of the crowd swells beyond the arena walls. You can't see them yet, but you will, soon. You were taken from somewhere. Maybe you were a prisoner of war, a runaway slave, or just unlucky. Now, your property, bought, branded, and broken into shape. Your life no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the man who feeds you to lions, or worse, to other men just as desperate to stay alive. You eat to survive, train to survive, sleep barely to survive, not to win, not to thrive, just survive. And for what? The chance to stand half naked in front of 50,000 strangers, gripping a sword with blistered hands, praying your opponent is slower, weaker, or simply more tired than you. This wasn't about glory, it was about gore, about rich men betting on your life, about crowds cheering not for your skill, but for your suffering. In this story, we'll follow the true day-to-day misery of a Roman gladiator, the wounds, the hunger, the humiliation, and the rare moments of hollow fame. So lie back, close your eyes, and let's find out why it sucked to be a Roman gladiator. If you enjoy this kind of slow, immersive history made for sleep, consider subscribing. There's more pain, dirt, and forgotten misery where this came from. You weren't born a gladiator. No one is. You became one, slowly, painfully, and without permission. It often started with a chain, iron rough and tight around your wrists. Maybe you were caught in battle, surrounded and disarmed, or maybe you were sold by your own people, betrayed for coin. Or perhaps worst of all, you were once a Roman yourself, punished for debt, rebellion, or disgrace. No matter how it began, it always ended the same way, in chains. You were dragged through markets. Eyes followed you, hands touched you, checked your teeth, your shoulders, your thighs. You were prodded like livestock, poked for muscle, for strength, for fight. If you had any spark in your eye, they noticed, and they liked it, because you wouldn't just fight, you'd entertain. They took you to a ludus, a training school, though school makes it sound too kind. It was more like a prison disguised as a gym. Tall walls, iron gates, guards with whips, and no way out. You were stripped, not just of your clothes, but of your name. You were branded, a hot iron, pressed to your neck or chest, hissing against your skin. The mark told the world you were property, not a man, not a citizen, a thing. Then came the food, high in calories, low in dignity, barley gruel, boiled beans, whatever meat was cheapest that day. You needed to bulk up, but not for your health. They wanted you to be big, heavy enough to bleed slow, strong enough to fight long, a showpiece, not a soldier. And then, the training. You woke before dawn. Every day, no matter how sore, how broken, how bruised, you were kicked awake, handed a wooden sword heavier than real steel, and sent to train until your arms shook. The doctors, your trainers, were not kind. Many were former gladiators themselves. They barked orders and expected perfection. One mistake could earn a lash across the back, a stumble, a blow to the head with the wooden sword, a poor attitude, a week without meat. You learned everything: how to block with a shield half your size, how to stab with precision, how to trip, fall, roll, and recover fast enough to not die when the real fight came. But more than that, you learned how to suffer publicly. They drilled you on how to stagger dramatically, how to bleed where the crowd could see it, how to fall to your knees like it meant something. You weren't just being trained to kill, you were being trained to perform, because that's what gladiators were, performers. You were their bloody theater. You weren't alone. Dozens of men trained beside you. Some would become your brothers, others, your executioners. You slept side by side, fought side by side, and one day you'd die side by side, or face to face. No one talked about the future, because gladiators didn't have one. Some tried to escape. None got far. The walls were high, the streets outside were worse, and betrayal was common. Men would trade your name for a scrap of bread, so you stayed. You adapted. You built calluses where your hands once blistered. You learned to move with pain, instead of fighting it. You learned that a wooden sword could still break your ribs if you blocked wrong. And slowly, the man you were faded. In his place, They built something else. A fighter. A brute. A spectacle. You caught your reflection in the training mirrors once, polished bronze nailed to the wall, and you didn't recognize the eyes staring back. The Lanasta, your owner, watched from the balcony above. Robes clean. Rings on every finger. He never smiled. Not really, but he did watch. He studied you like a craftsman studies his tools, and if you performed well, if you trained hard, fought better, bled just the right amount, he'd feed you more, let you sleep longer, maybe even give you boots. And if you didn't, you'd get less, or be sold, or worse, thrown into the arena early. Some men begged to fight sooner, not because they were ready, but because they couldn't bear the waiting, the endless training, the nightmares, the sound of fists hitting flesh from the next cell over. You heard everything. You smelled blood before you ever shed it, and still you trained. Because in the Ludus there were only two options, die fighting or die waiting, and waiting hurt more. You weren't just a fighter, you were an investment. Every blow you took, every bruise you earned, had a price, and someone was always calculating. In Rome, entertainment wasn't just for pleasure, it was a currency, a way to maintain control, a distraction for the masses. The emperors called it panem et circenses, bread and circuses. As long as the people were fed and entertained, they wouldn't revolt. And gladiators, you were the blood that bought the bread. No one went to the arena to watch a fair fight. They came to see desperation, sweat, sand soaked with blood. The cheer of a crowd wasn't for victory, it was for survival at the edge of death. You were the only part of the empire that was allowed to fail, and the crowd loved it. It all started with Amunis, a gladiator show sponsored by the wealthy, politicians, generals, emperors. They didn't host games out of charity, they did it to win favor, to prove power, to buy love with blood. Each show could host dozens, even hundreds of fighters, not just gladiators like you, but criminals, prisoners, beasts from across the empire, tigers from Parthia, elephants from Africa, wolves from Gaul, and the crowd came hungry. Admission was free, paid by men whose faces were printed on coins and whose ambitions were soaked in red. They paid your lanista to send you in, and the better your reputation, the higher the price. The more you bled in training, the more he earned when you entered the arena. To them you were livestock that screamed, but to the public, you were a myth. Your face might appear on pottery, on graffiti, in songs sung by children in the streets. They called you hero, but they never called you free. Vendors outside the Colosseum sold roasted nuts, honeyed wine, meat pies. Inside, gamblers whispered odds. Roman women placed bets on whether you'd kill your opponent in under 5 minutes, or if you'd be the one left twitching in the sand. You never saw the money, even if you won, even if the crowd chanted your name. The coins went to your master. Sometimes, if you pleased him, you'd get a bonus, a bowl of better food, a woman, a day of rest. But more often, you got nothing. You were alive. That was your reward, and it was profitable. Your death had to be earned. You were worth more alive. For a while, the most valuable gladiators were like racehorses. Their names became brands. Spiculus, Flamma, Carpophorus, men who killed 10, 20, 30 in the arena, and lived to fight again. They were bathed in perfume, given slaves. Rumor said one was gifted a villa, another invited to dine with the emperor, but they were still slaves. Well-dressed, well-fed, well-known slaves. For every one of them there were 100 you'd never hear of again. The no-name fighters, the ones sent in to die for training, the ones paired against animals, the ones who fought with wooden swords as the crowd laughed and threw rotten fruit. Even death had tears. The rich sat in marble seats near the front, senators in togas, fanning themselves while you fought to the death for their applause. The poor packed the upper levels. They came for free bread and free violence. The arena fed something in them. Some need to see pain that wasn't their own, something to curse, something to cheer, something to forget. The cost of olive oil had tripled, and so they came, in tens of thousands, and when the emperor entered, they rose, not for you, for the one who paid to put you there. Sometimes he gave the signal himself. thumbs up, thumbs down, a flick of the wrist to decide if your blood should soak into the sand or keep pounding through your chest. Your value was in what you could give them: fear, struggle, suffering. If you died too quickly, they booed. If you cried, they laughed. If you hesitated, they turned their eyes away. To survive, you had to be brutal, efficient, dramatic, but never too good. No one liked a gladiator who never died. He made the whole game feel fake, so even the best eventually fell. The Lannistas knew this. They insured you like cattle, bought contracts, sold you from one school to another like trading cards. Your body was a stock that went up with every kill, and crashed with every scar. Some masters were careful. They kept their best fighters in reserve, let them train younger men, or perform mock fights, never risking them in real matches. Others, they threw you in again and again. No rest, no strategy, just carnage. Because the more you fought, the more they earned, until your bones broke. Or your heart did. You once saw a man carried out on a cart, his arm twisted backwards, his face white with pain. They patched him up, barely, let him rest 3 days, then threw him back in. He lasted 12 seconds, and the crowd didn't even cheer, because by then they'd moved on. Their bread was stale, their mouths dry, and you were just one of many, another name to scratch off the roster, another debt paid in blood. You didn't get to choose your weapon. The Lannister chose for you. The moment you arrived at the Ludus, they sized you up like a slab of meat. Too tall, you'd fight slow. Too short, you'd need speed. Too lean, you were bait. Too broad, you were muscle to be showcased. Your build became your fate. You weren't a gladiator, you were a type. The Romans had names for each role, like casting parts in a play, except this play ended in blood. If you were tall and had reach, they might make you a secutor, the chaser. You'd wear a smooth helmet with tiny eye holes to block a retiarius's net. Your weapon, a gladius and a curved rectangular shield, heavy, blunt, built for slow, crushing advances. If you were fast and agile, they might make you a retiarius, the net man. You'd fight nearly naked, with just a loincloth and an arm guard, a weighted net in one hand, a trident in the other. You were meant to frustrate, to dance, to poke and run, but if you slipped, you died quickly. Then there were the murmeloes, built like walls, broad, armored, sweating inside a great crested helmet. They looked impressive, until they overheated, until they couldn't lift their shield fast enough. The Thrakes carried a curved sword and a small shield, quick, desperate, almost always bleeding. The Hoplomachus fought with spear and dagger, more like a soldier than a gladiator. You became what they needed, and what the crowd liked. Because the crowd knew these roles, like sports fans knew positions. They had favorites. They cheered for the mismatches. They bet on the exotic. Sometimes they'd pair a heavily armored murmelo against a lightly armored retiarius just for contrast. Weight versus speed, sweat versus skin. It wasn't a fight, it was a spectacle. And your armor. It was never about protection, it was about drama. You wore no full suit, no chainmail, just parts, pieces. A helmet that trapped heat and narrowed your sight. A single shoulder guard that left your other side exposed. A greave on one leg, not both, just one. Why? Because the crowd needed to see you bleed. They wanted to see flesh, they wanted wounds, they wanted performance. And so your skin became part of the uniform, your body became part of the show. The weapons were real, sharp, weighted, balanced for killing. Some were dulled for training. But when you stepped into the arena, no blunted edges, no mercy. You trained with wooden swords that were heavier than the real thing. That way, when the real steel hit your hand, it felt light, fast, deadly, but nothing prepared you for the first time. The moment you felt a blade scrape your arm and realized, this is not practice. The blood that ran wasn't someone else's, it was yours, and it was hot. You were taught how to take a wound, how to fall, how to cry out in pain without looking weak, how to die, if you had to, with your eyes open and your mouth shut, Because the Romans had rules even in death. If you fell wrong, they mocked you. If you begged, they booed. If you ran, they threw rocks. You learned to wear your pain like armor. But armor rusts, and pain, it grows. Each wound added up. Each cut became a scar. Each fight etched something into your bones. Some men fought for years. Their hands became claws. Their legs shook from old injuries. Their eyes dulled from trauma. You saw one man once, in the cells, turning his sword the wrong way. He said he couldn't tell which edge was sharp anymore. He died in the next fight, but before that he said something you never forgot. We are weapons, but weapons break. And he was right. No one held up under it forever. The doctors didn't teach you compassion. They taught you precision. Strike the thigh, cut below the ribs. Never aim for the chest. Too much bone. You learn to kill quickly, not for mercy, for survival. The longer a fight dragged, the more likely you were to make a mistake, and one mistake was all it took. Some fighters were better than others, smarter, faster, luckier. They found rhythms, stepped with silence, watched the shoulders, not the eyes. But even they fell eventually, because every match was a gamble, not just on who would win, but on how, and how long, and whether the crowd would want more. You could kill a man in the first 10 seconds, but if the crowd wasn't satisfied, they might call for your death too. So you learned to draw it out, to give the people what they wanted, to make pain look like poetry. But behind it all, behind the glint of your blade, behind the shine of your helmet was the truth. You were tired, so tired. Every weapon you held added weight to your soul. Every cheer chipped away at your will, and every fight, every slash, every parry, every dodge, wasn't about winning. It was about not being the one who had to kneel when the emperor raised his thumb. The arena is not quiet. Even before the crowd arrives, it hums, stone groaning under centuries of blood, sand being raked, gates creaking open and shut, soldiers barking orders, the slow dragging of bodies from yesterday's show. You feel it before you see it. The heat, the air, dry as parchment, the scent of iron, sweat, wine, and fear. They say the arena is where a man becomes a legend. They don't tell you it's also where a man becomes meat. You wait underground. The cells beneath the Colosseum are cramped and black, lit by torchlight that flickers across stone and flesh. Other fighters wait beside you, some praying, some pacing, some perfectly still. One is whispering a name over and over, not his own, maybe someone he hopes will be watching. You hear the crowd above, tens of thousands. They chant a name, not yours, someone else's. A champion maybe, or a beast. Then a trumpet sounds. Your gate creaks open. This is it. You step into the light, and for a second it blinds you. The sun reflects off the white marble walls. Banners wave, gold glints on the emperor's seat. The crowd stirs, rippling like a field of wheat. And then they see you. Their cheers erupt, not for who you are, but for what you are. A show, a sacrifice, a test of muscle and endurance and willingness to bleed. The sand beneath your feet looks soft from a distance, but up close it's coarse. It cuts into your soles. It's already stained, dark patches where blood sank in and never left. They call it the arena. The word gives us arena, but it means sand. Sand to soak up what's about to happen. You're not alone. Across from you, another fighter waits. You've never seen him before. He looks like you, tired, lean, armored just enough to give the crowd something to look at. He doesn't want to die either. You nod. He doesn't nod back. The editor, the show's producer, stands and gives the signal. The match begins. You don't charge. That's for amateurs. You circle, feet light, eyes locked, sword low. He lunges first. You deflect. He grunts. The crowd reacts, not to the hit, but to the rhythm, the performance. You strike. You miss. He counters. His blade grazes your side. The crowd roars. You don't feel pain yet, only heat. Not from the sun, from them. They want more. They always want more. Your lungs burn. Your limbs ache. Your heartbeat pounds in your ears louder than the cheers. This isn't a fight. It's an offering. You were taught to drag it out, so you bleed. A little, enough to excite them, not enough to die. And when you finally see an opening, you take it. You drive your blade into the soft spot under his arm. He drops, his shield falls, his knees hit the sand, and then his face. He twitches once, then stills. You stand there, breathing, not victorious, just still alive. You wait for the editor. He steps forward. He looks to the crowd. They scream. Some wave thumbs down. Some scream misses. Spare him. But he's not breathing. They spare you instead. You're led off the sand by two attendants. One wipes your blade. Another pours wine down your throat. Warm and sour. You glance back. His body is still there. You know what happens next. The corpses are dragged through a special gate, called the Porta Libertinensis, the gate of death. A man with a hot iron pokes the body through the heart, to make sure he's not pretending. He isn't. They never are. Later, they'll burn him, or bury him, or throw him into the Tiber if no one claims him. You go back underground, not to rest, to wait. There might be another match. Today, tomorrow, next week. You don't know. You just wait. Sometimes you're called back to the arena for a second show the same day. Sometimes you fight an animal. Sometimes you fight in teams. Sometimes it's a mock battle with spears and chariots. It doesn't matter. The goal is the same. Survive. Entertain. Repeat. You learn the patterns. You learn how the crowd moves, how they chant, how they choose favorites. You learn how the editor decides who lives. You learn how long you can bleed before you faint, how long you can last with a cracked rib, how to breathe with a collapsed nose. The arena teaches you more about pain than any battlefield, and it teaches you about power, because in that ring under that sun your life can be taken with a gesture, a thumb turned, a voice shouted, a silence that means we're bored now. That's what makes the arena so cruel, not just the death, the indifference. When you're new you think death is the worst thing, but it's not. It's the moment when you realize they've stopped watching, when you're dying, and no one's cheering, when the last thing you hear is a vendor calling out for olives. Death was always close. Not just in the ring. It lived in your food, in your sleep, in your blood-soaked boots. You didn't fight to win. You fought not to die. At least not yet. Some men pretended not to care. They swaggered, bragged, laughed between fights. But when they stood at the gate, waiting to enter the arena, all the swagger disappeared. Because the moment you saw the sunlight, the moment your feet touched sand, the moment the gate slammed shut behind you, you were alone. Even if you trained beside your opponent, even if you shared a meal with him the night before, even if you prayed to the same gods, you had to be the one who walked back. There was no shame in fear. Everyone was afraid. They just hid it differently. Some sharpened their blades until they gleamed like mirrors. Some whispered names of their children. Some looked straight at the crowd, defiant. Some never made it past the first blow. Death didn't always come quickly. Sometimes it was a clean strike, a sword to the gut, a trident to the chest. But other times it dragged. A slash to the thigh, followed by slow bleeding, a crushed windpipe, a collapsed lung. And the worst part, you still had to fight. You still had to make it look good, because dying in the arena wasn't just about dying. It was about dying well. You were trained for it. You practiced how to fall, how to clutch your wound, how to reach toward the sky, or gasp dramatically. The audience had expectations. If you died too fast, they booed. If you begged, they mocked. If you cried out for your mother, they laughed. But if you held your ground, if you stood tall, bled well and dropped with grace, they remembered you, maybe even cheered for you. That was the closest thing to honor you'd ever find. You learned to recognize the moment a man realized he wouldn't win, the shift in his stance, the tremble in his fingers, the quiet in his eyes. Sometimes they hesitated. That was the most dangerous. Hesitation made fights ugly. They'd run, or panic, or swing wildly, hoping for a miracle. There were no miracles. The crowd didn't like mercy. If you paused, if you waited too long to finish a man, they might call for your death too. So you learned to be quick, clean, efficient. You learned to kill without hate, without guilt, without looking them in the eye, because if you did, you might see yourself. Some men were spared. They called it missio mercy. If you fought bravely and lost with dignity, the editor might spare you, but not always. Sometimes the crowd was angry. Sometimes the day had dragged on too long. Sometimes they just wanted to see something die. The signal varied. Thumbs up, thumbs down, a flat hand. It changed over the years, but it all meant the same thing. End it. And you had to do it. Even if he was your friend. Even if you trained beside him for months. Even if he whispered your name as he bled. You had to kill him, because if you didn't, they'd kill you. You heard stories. Men who refused to deliver the final blow, who dropped their weapons, who cried. None of them walked out of the arena. Some were hacked to pieces on the sand. Some were dragged out and executed behind the walls. Some simply disappeared. There was no room for pity. The arena didn't care about your heart, only your blade. You got used to death, not numb, but practiced. You knew what it looked like. The twitch of the fingers, the soft gurgle of breath, the moment when the eyes stopped seeing. Sometimes they shook, sometimes they begged, sometimes they said nothing at all. You started to forget names. The faces blurred, only the wounds stayed vivid. A man with a broken jaw that bent the wrong way, another with a trident through his thigh, screaming until he couldn't. A boy with a blade in his side, who didn't realize he was dying until he fell, and yet you survived. Every day, you did what was required. You killed, you walked out of the sand, sometimes limping, sometimes bleeding, always changed. You stopped seeing death as the end. It became routine, expected, familiar, but never easy, because every man you killed left something behind, not just blood, weight. You carried it, in your bones, in your dreams, in the silence between matches, and you began to wonder, how many more bodies would it take before they stopped calling your name? How many more skulls cracked open? How many more hearts pierced? How many more eyes dimmed? You didn't want to know, you just wanted to live. But gladiators don't get to grow old, not really, and the lucky ones, they died fast. The unlucky, they lived long enough to be broken by survival. They cheered your name. It echoed across the marble walls, spilled down from the cheap seats, filled your ears louder than the blood in your veins. For a moment, you weren't just alive. You were admired. But that's the trick, isn't it? They don't cheer for you. They cheer for what you represent. Strength, violence, distraction. They don't see your scars. They see your posture. They don't know your story. They know your kill count. In that moment, beneath the sun, blood drying on your chest, sword raised high, you might believe it, that you've become something, that you matter, that glory is real. But glory is a candle in the wind, and the crowd, their memory fades fast. One day they scream your name, the next, they forget it. You become that guy who fought the big German, or the one with the broken nose. They remember your death better than your face. You could win a dozen matches, survive wounds that should have killed you, fight through fever, through agony, through darkness, and still you are only as good as your last performance. Some men chased it. They bathed in perfume, styled their hair, practiced dramatic poses. They became characters. One man you knew wore eagle feathers in his helmet. Another painted his shield red and gold like a rising sun. They said if you stood out, you lasted longer. They weren't wrong. The crowd loved a brand. Merchants carved your likeness into cheap figurines. Children drew you on scraps of parchment. Women whispered your name between married lips. Some gladiators even had groupies. You'd see them, wealthy Roman women in fine dresses, waiting by the gates. Some offered bread, some offered more. You were exotic, dangerous, safe, only because you were caged. They didn't love you, they loved the idea of you. You weren't a man, you were the beast they could pet before the kill. The more famous you got, the more closely you were watched. Every smile was calculated, every match was higher stakes. One mistake, and your story would end the same as the unknowns in silence. Fame in the arena was a borrowed robe. It looked grand, but it wasn't yours. It belonged to the crowd, and they could take it back at any moment. You heard tales of the greats. Flamma, Spiculus, Carpophorus, men who killed dozens, maybe more. Men who were offered freedom, and refused it, chose to stay. But what they don't say is why. Some of them had nothing left on the outside, no home, no land, no name. The arena was all they had. Inside, they were someone. Outside, they were another former slave, with a bad leg, and a 1,000-yard stare. So they stayed. They clung to the roar of the crowd, like it was breath. You knew a man once, veteran of 20 matches, survived them all. They called him the Iron Shade. The Emperor offered him a wooden sword, the Rudies, the symbol of freedom. He hesitated, then declined. That night, over stale wine, he whispered to you, "Out there I'm broken, in here at least I'm feared." You understood, because even though you hated every second of it, the pain, the hunger, the way your life belonged to strangers, part of you began to need the noise, the affirmation, the reminder that you still existed. Without it, you were just a scarred man in a quiet world, and Rome doesn't make space for quiet men. Some gladiators tried to cash in on their fame, sold trinkets, gave speeches, tried to train others, but most didn't last, because glory doesn't heal you, it doesn't feed you, it doesn't protect you from what happens when the lights go out and the arena doors close for good. You start to ask yourself, what was it all for? The kills, the wounds, the applause. You tell yourself it means something, that you were part of history, that you inspired someone, that you proved something. But deep down, you know the truth. Fame was a mask they gave you, to hide the fact that you were still in chains, that you always had been. And no amount of glory changes the sound your heart makes when the crowd forgets your name. They promised you freedom. It was the only light at the end of a long blood-soaked tunnel. A whisper passed between broken men in dark cells, a hope carved into stone walls with fingernails. If you fight long enough, you'll earn your way out. That was the dream. Survive enough matches, win enough crowds, obey the lanista, please the editor, bleed the right amount, die the right way, but not too soon. And maybe you'd be handed the Rudis, a simple wooden sword. That's all it was. Not sharp, not gilded, just wood. But in Rome, it was everything. It meant you were no longer a slave. It meant you could leave. It meant you had earned your name back. But here's what they didn't tell you. Most never made it that far. They died before their 10th match, before they learned how to parry without looking, before the crowd learned their names, because freedom was a reward dangled just far enough out of reach, not for mercy, but for motivation. The hope of it kept you obedient, kept you moving, kept you stepping into the arena even when your ribs ached and your dreams bled. You knew of one man who got it, fought 24 matches, lived through all of them. They gave him the Rudis. The crowd clapped. He raised it above his head. His owner kissed him on the cheek like a proud father. And then they pushed him out the back gate. Just like that. No pension, no protection, no place to sleep. He wandered for weeks, wound up back in the city, guarding taverns, scrubbing floors, teaching boys how to swing sticks. The last time you saw him, he was limping through the forum, begging for coin. Still had the Rudis, tied to his belt like a talisman, as if it meant anything out here. Because here's the truth, freedom wasn't what you thought it would be. You didn't become a citizen. You didn't get land. You didn't get peace. You got permission to exist outside the walls. But you carried the walls with you, in your bones, in your dreams, in the way people looked at you when they saw the scars and guessed who you used to be. They didn't respect you. They pitied you, feared you, avoided you. You were a reminder of something they'd rather forget. And those few who did win their freedom, some of them came back, voluntarily, back to the ludus, back to the sand, back to the chains. Because the arena may have been hell, but it was a familiar hell. And out here you had to build something from scratch, with hands that only knew how to kill. Freedom in Rome was not an end, it was a gamble. Some used it well, married, taught, lived. But most, they drifted, they drank, they faded, they died quietly, not in front of roaring crowds, but in gutters, in silence. And even that was better than the ones who survived too long. The ones who became trainers, doctors, old gladiators teaching new gladiators how to die slowly. They limped through the sand with stiff knees and hollow eyes. They barked commands but never picked up a blade. They spoke with the authority of men who had once mattered, and every night, when the torches went out, they stared at the walls and remembered what it was like to matter. Freedom, you used to crave it, but now you wonder if it's just another word for being forgotten, because at least in the arena, when you bled, someone was watching. It doesn't happen all at once. At first the crowd still claps when you enter the arena. They still call your name, but it's softer now, less urgent, like they've heard it too many times. You're no longer new, no longer exciting, no longer rising. You've already risen, and what rises must fall. The young ones get the attention now, the fresh meat, the ones with no scars and too much energy. They leap into the ring like they're invincible, and maybe they are for now. The crowd loves them, not because they're better, but because they're next. And you're familiar. You've fought, you've won, you've bled, and they're tired of you. That's the curse of survival. You outlive the love. You still fight, still train, still endure. But something has shifted. You feel it when you walk through the gate, and the cheer is just polite. When the vendors don't shout your name, when the editor doesn't even look up from his scroll, you start to doubt yourself. Are you slower, weaker, or just boring? Your trainer tells you it's normal. It happens to all of us, he says. We get old. The crowd wants blood that bounces. You hate that he's right. You watch the younger men train, strong backs, clean stances, eager eyes, and you remember being them. Before the limp, before the shoulder that clicks, before the dreams you don't talk about, you try to keep up, push harder, swing faster, take riskier hits, but your body rebels. You hide the pain, because if they see weakness, they'll exploit it. You've seen it happen. A champion falters, a bad match, a stumble. The crowd turns. They boo, and the editor orders a second fight that same day. A punishment, a warning. That's when the cheering really stops. The day the crowd wants you gone, they don't say it out loud. They don't have to. You hear it in the silence when your name is called, in the sigh when you step into the sand, in the way they cheer harder for your opponent. They want a show, and you're not giving it to them anymore. You're trying. God, you're trying. But the roar is gone, replaced by murmurs, shifts in seats, eyes glancing toward the next act, and you realize something. The crowd doesn't remember the scars they watched you earn. They remember the last time you made them gasp. And if you can't do that anymore, you're just in the way. One day after a match, one you barely survived, the lanista doesn't meet your eye. He hands you a bowl of water, walks away. No praise, no comment, just indifference. That hurts more than any wound. You return to your cell and stare at the wall, at the scratches you carved for every fight. They used to matter. Now they feel like tally marks for someone counting down your usefulness. You think about walking away, but where would you go? You're not famous enough to retire, not wealthy enough to disappear, not broken enough to be pitied. You're in between, a shadow of a legend, still walking, still breathing, but invisible. That's the worst part. Not the pain, not the blood, not the fear, the forgetting. You once fought in front of emperors. Now they don't know your name. You once heard your chant ripple across the Colosseum. Now you hear coughing, yelling, disinterest. You ask yourself, was it worth it? The kills, the glory, the stolen years. And the answer, you don't know, because you're still alive, still swinging, still waiting, waiting for one more moment, one more gasp, one more cheer, one more match that might remind them of who you were. You won't get it, not really, but you hope, because without that, what's left? You don't know it's your last match. Not at first. It begins like all the others. You wake sore, dress slow, eat barley gruel that tastes like nothing, wrap your wrists, sharpen your blade. There's a numbness now, not fear, not even dread, just routine. Another gate, another name, another man to kill or be killed by. But something feels different. The lanista won't meet your eye. The trainer pats your back a little too long. The guards are quieter than usual. No jokes, no insults, just silence. Even the other fighters avoid you, like they've seen the script, and you haven't. You're older now, Not ancient, but slower. You know it, they know it, and they've matched you against someone younger, someone newer. He waits for you in the holding area, bare chest, bright eyes, bloodlust in his breath. You remember being him, the tight stance, the hunger, the belief that survival is just one good strike away. You want to warn him, but there's no time. The gates open, the sunlight hits your face like judgment, and the crowd, they cheer, not for you, for him. He's the story now, you're the ending. The match begins, he moves quick. You block, deflect, reposition. He's strong but reckless. You've seen it all before. You land the first blow, a cut across his arm. The crowd gasps. Maybe they remember. You step forward, press the advantage. Then it happens. Your knee buckles, old injury. You knew it was coming, but not now. You stumble, just enough. He sees it, and he hesitates, only for a moment. Then he charges. Your blade is slow, too slow. His hits your side, deep. You fall. The world tilts sideways. The sand tastes like rust. You hear your own breath, wet, rattling. He stands over you panting, uncertain. The crowd roars. The editor rises. You don't look at him. You don't need to. You already know. This is the part you trained for. The final fall. You reach for the sky, just like they taught you. Hand out, spine straight, eyes open. You bleed where they can see it, and they cheer. It's not sorrow. It's not cruelty. It's closure. The young man looks down. You nod. He drives the blade through your chest. There's a jolt. Then nothing. No pain. Just silence. Real silence. You've heard it once before. In the cells, late at night, when everyone else was asleep. But this silence is different. It's not emptiness. It's release. They carry your body through the gate of death, just like the others. You are not special. They'll burn you, or bury you, or forget you. But for a moment, they remembered. You gave them something. A show, a gasp, a death they could feel, then move on from. And you don't feel anger, or loss, just stillness, because the sand has taken you. And in the end, it's a better grave than most.